Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining me. This is the lovely podcast, The Endurance of Labor Laws. I am your lovely host, Lesley Sullivan, and this is episode 35. And in this episode, we're going to take a look at the Sheet Metal Workers International Association. But first of all, I wanted to give a shout out to some of my listeners because you guys are absolutely awesome. I love to hear and see from you. So let's go to my list here. First of all, big shout out to Texas, Oklahoma, Virginia, District of Columbia, Pennsylvania. Hey, Pennsylvania and New York. Love you, New York. Whenever I see New York, sometimes it makes me think of the Statue of Liberty. And I love the Statue of Liberty, but one thing I don't understand is when they closed it down. So I don't know if they're doing that for maintenance and repairs, but there for a good while it was closed down, and I think that is such a bad thing to do because I think it should remain open. And if they are doing repairs, find a way to keep parts of it open so that way people that are visiting the United States can go see it because it truly is a wonderful landmark and a wonderful monument in our country. So to go ahead and start on this puppy, it says the Sheet Metal Workers International Association. Let's see, it merged into the International Association of Sheet Metal, Air, Rail, and Transportation Workers. It was founded in 1888. It was dissolved August 11th, 2014. It is headquartered in Washington, D.C. It has locations in the United States and Canada. They have 150,000 members, and Joseph Sellers is their general president. They have affiliations with the AFL, CIO, and CLC. So it starts off by saying the Sheet Metal Workers International Association was a trade union of skilled metal workers who perform architectural sheet metal work, fabricate and install heating and air conditioning work, shipbuilding, appliance construction, heater and boiler construction, precision and specialty parts manufacture, and a variety of other jobs involving sheet metal. On August 11, 2014, it merged with the United Transportation Union, also known as UTU, to form the International Association of Sheet Metal, Air, Rail, and Transportation Workers, known by the acronym SMART. The Sheet Metal Workers International Association represented about 150,000 members and 185 local unions in the United States and Canada. A little bit of history here. It says in 1887, Robert Kellerstrass, secretary of the Tin and Cornice Makers Association of Peoria, Illinois, a local sheet metal workers union, began agitating for the formation of a national sheet metal workers union. Contacting as many tinsmiths locals as he could, Kellerstrass arranged for a founding convention to be held in January 1888. 11 delegates from Illinois, Missouri, Nebraska, Ohio, and Tennessee met for 4 days. The union was founded on January 25, 1888, in Toledo, Ohio, as the Tin, Sheet Iron, and Cornice Workers International Association. In 5 years, the organization grew to include 108 locals in the United States. The first local in Canada was chartered in 1896 as well in Toronto. A second Canadian local formed in Montreal in 1900 and a Vancouver local in 1902. The union joined the American Federation of Labor, also known as the AFL, in 1889. The Panic of 1893 weakened the union significantly, however, and the union's finances collapsed. The AFL revoked the Tin, Sheet Iron, and Cornice Workers Charter in 1896, even though many locals continued to exist. The union reorganized in 1897 as the Amalgamated Sheet Metal Workers International Association and was rechartered by the AFL in 1899. In 1902, the Amalgamated Sheet Metal Workers Union instituted its first national death benefit for its members. In 1903, the Amalgamated Sheet Metal Workers merged with the Sheet Metal Workers National Alliance, a secessionist group that had broken away from the Union in 1902, creating the Amalgamated Sheet Metal Workers International Alliance. In 1907, the Union merged with the Coppersmiths International Union. The Union became embroiled in a bruising battle with the Plumbers and Carpenters Unions in 1919. The sheet metal workers had organized thousands of railway locomotive fabricators nationwide, but now the Plumbers Union was arguing that it had jurisdiction over the piping work that went into building these engines. Railroad shop workers from the machinists, blacksmiths, and plumbers met in St. Louis, Missouri in 1920 after a number of local plumbers' railroad unions defected to the Amalgamated Sheet Metal Workers. Although the workers could not agree on which union should have jurisdiction over the work, the workers did agree to form the Federated Railroad Shopmen's Union to protect their work from being taken over by non-railroad workers. In 1921, the Federated Union disbanded, but the Amalgamated Sheet Metal Workers won substantial jurisdictional concessions from the plumbers. The conflict would continue into the 1950s, substantially weakening the Amalgamated Sheet Metal Workers. Finally, on April 26, 1955, the National Mediation Board reaffirmed Amalgamated Sheet Metal Worker jurisdiction over plumbing and pipe fitting work in the railroad industry. The introduction of metal moldings in buildings also created a problem for the union. The United Brotherhood of Carpenters and Joiners of America claimed jurisdiction over trim and moldings, which had previously been made of wood. The Carpenters Union had won a jurisdictional award from an arbitrator in New York City in the spring of 1909. But the Amalgamated Sheet Metal Workers demanded that the Building Trades Department, also known as BTD of the AFL, issue a ruling. By a 3-to-1 majority, delegates to the Building Trades Convention voted in favor of the Amalgamated Sheet Metal Workers. The Carpenters, then the second largest union in the AFL, withdrew from the building trades and initiated a series of jurisdictional strikes against the Amalgamated Sheet Metal Workers at job sites nationwide. The BTD retaliated by asking AFL President Samuel Gompers to revoke the Carpenters Union Charter. Instead, Gompers led the AFL Executive Council in demanding that the BTD reinstate the Carpenters Union. The building trades did so in 1910, but continued to vote in favor of the Amalgamated Sheet Metal Workers' claims on work. The Carpenters Union disaffiliated again. The Carpenters Union continued to conduct strikes against the Amalgamated Sheet Metal Workers and increasingly won the support of building contractors and local building trades councils. The National Board of Jurisdictional Awards also voted in favor of the Amalgamated Sheet Metal Workers, but the pressure by the much larger Carpenters Union proved too great, and the Amalgamated Sheet Metal Workers conceded jurisdiction over interior work in 1926. The Amalgamated Sheet Metal Workers' railroad affiliates were deeply involved in the Great Railroad Strike of 1922, which proved to be a disaster for the union's railway unions. The Amalgamated Sheet Metal Workers absorbed the chandelier, brass, and metal workers in 1924 and once more changed its name, this time to the Sheet Metal Workers International Association. In 1926, the Sheet Metal Workers co-found the Railway Labor Executives Association, a union lobbying group. In the spring of 1927, members of Local 206 in San Diego, California, built structural reinforcements for Charles Lindbergh's aircraft, the Spirit of St. Louis. During World War II, Sheet Metal Workers members assisted in the building of buildings, experimental machinery, and atomic weapons making equipment at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, as part of the Manhattan Project. In 1946, the Sheet Metal Workers became one of the founding members of the Atomic Trades and Labor Council. The sheet metal workers are notable for negotiating a number of firsts in the construction industry. In 1946, Local 28 in New York City negotiated the first local health and welfare plan in the construction industry. In 1950, Local 28 negotiated the first pension plan in the construction industry. In 1966, the union established its first national pension plans, one for construction workers and one for manufacturing workers. In 1960, the Sheet Metal Workers organized its first political action committee, the Political Action League, also known as POW. This next section is about their leadership. It says the sheet metal workers have a long history of stable leadership. Robert Byron headed the union from 1939 to 1959. For 3 decades afterward, the union was headed by a father-son team, which I don't agree with because that's nepotism, which we will see happen here. Edward F. Carlisle was elected president in 1959, and his son Edward J. Carlisle succeeded him in 1971. In 1993, Edward J. Carlisle resigned as president of the Sheet Metal Workers after union members strongly criticized his lavish lifestyle and excessive spending. Carlisle had a year left in his term. In 1993, Arthur Moore, a vice president of the Union, was elected to succeed the younger Carlisle as president. Moore won election as president outright in August 1994 and was active in the coalition which unseated AFL-CIO President Lane Kirkland in 1995 and elected John Sweeney. Moore retired after one term, and Michael J. Sullivan was elected president of the Union. As far as I know, I am not related to that gentleman. I have no idea who he is. It says here, Sullivan retired in 2011. Joseph J. Nigro was elected General President effective July 1st, 2011. He had been General Secretary-Treasurer since 2006 and Assistant to the General President prior to that since September 1999. The merger between the SMWIA and the United Transportation Union, UTU, was finalized at the SMART First General Convention held in Las Vegas, Nevada, the week of August 11th through the 15th in year 2014. SMART stands for the International Association of Sheet Metal, Air, Rail, and Transportation Workers. This next section is briefly about contributions to political campaigns. It says, according to the Center of Responsive Politics, Sheet Metal Workers Union was the United States' 27th largest donor to federal political campaigns and committees, having contributed over $51.8 million since 1989, over 90% of which went to the Democratic Party and other liberal groups. That's concerning because they're buying votes and trying to swing votes, and that's not right. That directly impacts and affects our electoral college. It says here, in the 2018 election cycle, SMART's Political Action Committee ranked 6th in donations to federal candidates at nearly $2.8 million. And then it lists the presidents here. This is kind of neat. It says Archibald Barnes was president from 1888 to 1889. E.F. McKeon was president from 1890 to 1891. Hugh Schwab was president in 1892. F.A. Pauchat, I think is how you pronounce his name, he was president from 1893 to 1894. T.J. Ritter was president in 1895. R.M. Ryan was president in 1896. H.H. Brouch was president from 1897 to 1898. F.C. Cole was president from 1899 to 1902. Richard Pattison was president from 1903 to 1904. Michael O'Sullivan was president from 1905 to 1912. John J. Hines was president from 1913 to 1938. Robert Byron was president from 1939 to 1959. Edward F. Carlisle was president from June 1959 to September 1970. Edward J. Carlisle was president from October 1970 to July 1993. Arthur Moore was president from July 1993 to 1999. Michael J. Sullivan was president from 1999 to 2011. It says Joseph J. Nigro was president from 2011 to 2015, after August 2015, the union merged into SMART. And after that, Joseph Sellers Jr. was president, or still is president, from 2015 to present. So it's kind of a short and sweet one here with this Sheet Metal Workers International Association. And I think one of the things that needs to be pointed out is that this union, the reason why it's still around, technically it was dissolved, but it got merged into another union, and here's why. They had these hissy fits with the plumbers and the carpenters. One of the biggest reasons why was because of the advancement of technology and how things were being built in buildings and on railroads and things like that. So their trades and their union work were overlapping, which led to disagreements, led to strikes. And so instead of just completely dissolving their union and not giving their union members a chance to be a part of anything, they went ahead and merged with another union. Because if you think about 150,000 members is a lot of members to just let go and not be unionized. Because otherwise, if they had not gone under the umbrella of another union, they would not have probably a good contract. Their wages might be affected, their benefits might be affected. Now, I'm not completely for unions, but when you're talking about 150,000 people, and when they're used to being protected by a union, and then now they're no longer protected just like the rest of us, I can understand their concern where they do want to be a part of a union and they want to be a part of a good one that supports them. The biggest concern I have is how much money they have been donating to the Democratic Party. That greatly concerns me because at this point it is a little over $51 million. That tells me that they're buying candidates and they're buying votes. That's not the American way. Some people will argue that it is, but it's not, because if you truly believe in the United States and you truly value our Constitution, then you're not going to be donating millions of dollars like that. I'm not against people donating money to political campaigns, but you have to be very careful what you donate to and why you're donating. Because I notice that they're not donating to Republicans. It's mostly to liberal groups, and liberal groups tend to lean towards socialism and towards fascism, and that's not the American way. And that's not what our Constitution is. I think that if people want to be fascist or communist or socialist, that's fine, just do it someplace else, because America was not founded on any three of those. We were founded technically as a republic and as a democracy, and we left a monarchy so that our citizens could truly be free and so that we would not be used and abused for our money, for our taxes, and for our vote. Because that's basically what was happening to the citizens of the colonies that were here. Because when we left Britain, we were not a country. We left to become a country. I think some people forget that, and I think they forget it because it's not being taught in schools, which is very unfortunate because it's part of our history of the United States. So whenever these people complain about the colonization of America and they make it seem like the United States was the problem, we were not even the United States back when things were being colonized. The United States did not colonize the United States. There were different countries that colonized over here. You had Britain, you had Spain, I think you also had France, because you also had the French and Indian War that occurred as well. But, there are so many people that are so ignorant on the history of the United States, and I think that if they would just become knowledgeable, if they would just read the history of the United States and understand why our founding fathers chose to do what they did and start a new country, write a new constitution that grants freedom to men. Women were not considered equal citizens at that time. That's not to diss them, that's just how it was back then. Not just in our country, but in almost every other country it was like that. Because women were still seen pretty much as property, and that you could use them in treaties and things like that. But the main point of becoming the United States is that we were trying to get away from a very evil monarchy in Great Britain, because we were basically just being used for our tax dollars. And, that rings true to what the Democratic Party is still doing today. They're using the citizens of the United States for their tax dollars, which is very concerning because we were not founded to be used. We were founded to be free. So what's interesting is that the founding fathers, they were for taxes, but low taxes. But they wanted freedom within that. Unfortunately, Britain just thought that they could just tax us, but then not give us representation, because that's where that phrase comes from. No taxation without representation. So it was really irritating people here in the United States, or the colonies that is, the original 13 colonies. It was really irritating people that, we have an economy over here, the monarchy is way over there across the ocean, and yet they're demanding all these taxes, but they don't live over here. They don't know what we go through, what we live with, and what our economy is, but yet they're trying to act like they still own us. So it was one of those things that people just wanted to be free. Well, under unions and under the Democratic Party, you're really not that free. You're really not. Look at what's happening in the United States right now. You kind of have a semi-tyrannical, and I say semi-tyrannical because they're not as bad as other administrations, but you have a semi-tyrannical administration that is basically encouraging people not to go to work. They can just live off unemployment, which is a total waste of money and time, and it doesn't work because it leads to debt, and they just want to spend billions of dollars. They just want to use the American people as their personal piggy bank for every little pet project that they have. And they claim that the reason why they're spending so much money is to fulfill their promises. Well, these promises are on social welfare programs that were doomed from the beginning because they're socialized. It's like socialized medicine or just welfare programs do not really work. And the United States was not founded on welfare programs. We were never for that. But over time, you have people that really did not value democracy. They did not really value hard work. And so you have these fractions or these factions that come into play, and they just kind of want to tear up our Constitution. And that's not the American way, and that's not how I want to see my country go down the tubes by any means. But just look at it this way. If people understood the history of the United States, number one, they would not want unions. Number two, they would not want a crazy liberal nutbag party. I don't mind there being Democrats, but they've been overtaken by some crazy liberal nutbags that have no place being in office, and they have no place trying to tell other people what to do because they don't even act American. They don't even really believe in the Constitution. So that tells me if someone doesn't actually believe in our basic human rights in the United States, then why should I listen to them? And I don't really believe in their opinion, and I don't side with them. And I know that if people read the history of America, they would not be so frivolous in throwing their rights away, because whenever you align yourself with a radical party, which would be the Democratic Liberal Party right now, when you align yourself with someone like that, you're taking a huge risk of losing a lot of your rights, which is exactly what has happened in almost every country that has adopted fascism, socialism, or especially communism. And a good example of that is communist Russia when it was the USSR. And then also under Mussolini in Italy, it was bad there during that time. He was a fascist. And then also you have communist China, which still practices slave labor. They don't like to call it slave labor, but that's what it is. When they try and control where you work, how you work, that kind of thing, their citizens are not really free. You're not free in China unless you are super wealthy. Other than that, you're pretty much a slave. And the government decides where you work, how you work, where you go, why you go somewhere. That's just how it is over there. Well, the more rights we give up here in the United States, the more our country and our economy and our way of life is going to mimic other countries that we don't agree with what they do. And if we don't agree with what other countries are doing, then we should not be emulating them. We should not be copying them. We should not be reflecting their values and their way of life over here. When people flee from those other countries to come here to the United States so that they can be truly free. I can't tell you how many people I've met from other countries that they have no desire to go back to their home country because their home country is awful compared to the United States. The United States, we have so much freedom that we take for granted. And I think that's what liberals do. They constantly take things for granted. And so do unions. Unions just kind of live in their own little bubble where they just think they can make all this money and not really be held accountable for their work per se. Like they want to make all this money, but they want to be doing the same kind of work. Well, that's not how a free market works. That's not how capitalism works. And that's not how you have inventions. That's not how you have innovation. That's not how you advance your society. If all you want to do is do the same thing every day for the rest of your life, but just make more money, doing the exact same thing, guess what? You are part of the problem. You're not part of the solution, because you're actually helping to instigate inflation, decreasing our currency in terms of its value, and you're also creating a different kind of poverty within your society. Because if you're overinflating your wages, but yet you're doing the same kind of work, then you're stifling the free market and you're not allowing other people to make good money. And that's what I don't like about unions, is that they put themselves above all other types of workers, whether it's non-union or immigrant workers or illegal workers or maybe temporary visas, things like that. Unions put themselves at the top of the food chain, and they're not at the top. Not by any means. They're not any better than you or me. That's just how they treat things, because that's what they're taught, that's what they're told, that's what they like to believe. But you see, here's the thing. We all have workers' rights, regardless of whether we are in a union or not. And those workers' rights come from our Constitution, which is the Constitution of the United States of America, comes down to the Bill of Rights, our amendments, and also comes down to your state constitution. Whatever state you live in, I would strongly encourage you to read your state constitution. I have read the Constitution of Oklahoma. It's very interesting. The one from Texas, way more interesting, way more aggressive in their writing, but for good reason, because they had to deal with Mexico a long time ago. So I think the reason why Texas's constitution is written as strongly as it is so that they can secede anytime they want. Because you have to remember Texas, the land that is now called Texas was originally part of Mexico. Years and years and years ago. But anyway, I won't go into that because that's not really part of this podcast. But anyway, just be mindful of what you join, what you stand by, and what you believe in. Because all those things affect the here and now, and it also affects the future. Big time. And I know that it can seem like a good thing to have a bunch of unions everywhere, but unions drastically increase the price of goods, but the goods don't increase in terms of getting better quality. That's the problem. So that's what I'm talking about when I mention inflated wages. And that their wages lead to inflation within whatever market or trade they are in because they don't want competition. Well, competition is where you have the best kind of economy or the best kind of market. Because it's a consumer market, it's not a union market. These unions, they act like the market belongs to them when it does not. It belongs to the consumer. It belongs to people that actually own the businesses. So, some of these unions, they need to be dethroned in terms of, deregulation and things like that. But it's almost like a catch-22, I feel like, because it's like we want really good wages, but not overinflated wages. We want safe working conditions, but we don't want strikes. We want really good goods, but we don't want overinflated goods. Like, we don't want goods that are so expensive that no one can afford them. So it's kind of like we're walking a constant tightrope sometimes when we're dealing with labor unions because they have their way and then everybody else is like the highway to them. But I look at it this way. Everything at one point was new. Whether it's an invention, a type of service, maybe a new type of drug or a new type of car or a new type of media, whether it's a telephone or a television or whatever the case may be. At one point, everything was new. If we followed the role model of unions, if we followed their MO, we would never invent anything. We would never get better at what we do. We would just want the same thing every day and just basically live in a completely obsolete world because unions did not believe in modernization. They just want to keep on, but get paid more to do the same thing. Well, that doesn't make sense at all. If anything, it destroys your economy. It reduces your workforce, and it decreases the value of your labor, and it also decreases the value of the goods that you are creating or manufacturing. And that doesn't help anybody. It doesn't technically help the unions. It doesn't help the workers, and especially doesn't help the consumer. It doesn't help the economy. Not by any means. It really does not. So it's better to keep pushing forward, keep moving forward, having new innovations, and that happens in the private sector, not the public sector. And I mention that because these unions, they tend to donate their monies towards things that are more towards government regulated, which hence being the Democratic Party, and that would be more towards the public sector. Whereas the Republican Party is more geared towards the private sector because that's where people can have really good jobs. And if they need to leave a job, they can leave a job and go to a better job. But if you want things to be more controlled by the government, which is what unions want, because they think they've got the government in their back pocket, and what these unions don't realize, the government has them in their back pocket. So the government can use and abuse them anytime they want. The government makes all these promises that it doesn't keep, and then these unions get mad, and it's like, well, welcome to the real world, of where the federal government, and sometimes the state government, but mostly the federal government does not keep its promises. Welcome to the real world. So when things like that happen, you vote in different people. You get people in there that know what they're talking about. They want to do some good, and they don't want a bunch of power-hungry bureaucrats to stay in charge all the time. Bureaucrats do have their place in this world. I just can't think of where. Because bureaucrats tend to not have your best intentions at heart. They mostly care about themselves because they're selfish, greedy people. But unfortunately, Washington, D.C. is loaded with bureaucrats. They've been in the same office, the same desk job, the same department for years and years, and it's so difficult to get new people in there. It just is. Maybe that should be a new prayer that we lift up. But I've learned this over the years. It's not over till God says it's over, and even then, He makes exceptions to the rule all the time. All the time. So even when things seem dark and dismal, There is always a light at the end of the tunnel. There is always hope. There is always freedom, especially here in the United States. As long as we stick to our core values and we don't shred our Constitution and we just really value each other as a fellow human being and not trying to be overly competitive and practice favoritism, because as we've seen from this union, favoritism doesn't work, because you had that father and son duo that I bet they probably almost financially bankrupted the union is what I had to guess. But anyway, that is it for this lovely podcast. So until next time, I pray that you're happy, healthy, and whole. And if we do not meet again until then, I pray that you have a wonderful and safe Happy New Year. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.